and good day. My name is Jürgen Steinmetz from eTurboNews, and this is a breaking news update. For more news updates and shows, please go to youtube.com/travel news group. youtube.com/travel news group. Here's our update.
G20 Rome Summit, closing press conference on the 31st of October 2021 held at the Nuvola. The G20 in Rome just ended with a press conference. eTurboNews Italy correspondent Mario Masciullo attended. Among the main themes of the works, besides the pandemic and vaccines, the climate crisis, economic recovery and the situation in Afghanistan. The closing G20 Rome Summit press conference on the 31st of October 2021 held at the Nuvola, the Italian Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, opened the G20, hoping for a unity of intent against the pandemic. The summit is held for the first time in Italy. For Francesco Tuffarelli, president of the Europolitica network, it is fundamental to put the human person back at the center of political and economic actions. G20, Draghi, may the world walk together to win the fight against the pandemic. The closing G20 Rome Summit press conference by Prime Minister Mario Draghi. The topic: G20, an agreement between the US and the EU for the removal of duties on steel and aluminum. Draghi, first step towards greater commercial openness. G20, towards a downward agreement on the climate, a ceiling of 1.5 degrees of global warming but only a vague reference to zero emissions, by mid-century. G20, Draghi claims, we have filled the words with substance. We will gradually reach 2050 as the date for zero emissions. At this summit, we made sure that our dreams are still alive, but now we must make sure we turn them into facts, said the premier at a press conference. Finally, there is a promise to give 100 billion a year for poor countries. And he then announced that Italy will triple its financial commitment to 1.4 billion a year for the next 5 years for the Green Climate Fund. The Prime Minister then goes into the specifics of the results obtained, explaining that, we have committed considerable resources, we have kept these commitments and we have ensured that our dreams are still alive and are making progress. We will be judged for what we do, not for what we say, he added, echoing the words of several leaders. And he then promised, we are proud of the results obtained at the G20, but this is only the beginning. Draghi, 100 billion from G20 for poor countries on climate. The G20 was a success. The Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, has decided to evaluate the summit that has just ended in Rome on the climate emergency. A summit that, he says, has brought several benefits, even if it was not easy. Among these, the PM cites the reform of international taxation, that we have tried to do for years without success, the limit of 1.5 degree of average global warming that improves the Paris agreements, in addition to having brought some countries skeptical of common positions on decarbonization, with clear reference to Russia and, above all, China. The first success that Draghi wants to underline is the maximum limit of the rise in global average temperatures, set at 1.5 degree. In terms of climate, for the first time, the G20 countries have committed to keeping within reach the goal of containing warming below 1.5 degrees with immediate action and medium-term commitments, he said at his final press conference. Adding that public funding for the construction of new coal plants will not go beyond the end of this year. But the issue of zero emissions and the resistance shown by China and Russia, which did not accept the 2050 deadline, projecting the goal to the next decade, 2060, were the main theme of the questions posed by journalists to Prime Minister Draghi, who, however, is said satisfied, even showing himself surprised by the openness, according to him, shown by the two governments. From China until a few days ago I expected a more rigid attitude, there was the desire to grasp a language more oriented towards the future than the past, added Draghi. Russia and China have accepted the scientific evidence of the 1.5 degree, which involves very considerable sacrifices, are not easy commitments to keep. China produces 50% of the world's steel, many plants run on coal, it is a difficult transition. And on the limit to 2050, he adds, compared to the previous situation, the commitment is a little more towards 2050 in the language of the press release. It is not accurate, but it was absent before. There has been a shift with a more hopeful language even on the part of the countries that until now had said no. And this agreement was possible, he explains, only thanks to an approach based on multilateralism that involved all the powers present. At the G20 we saw countries that approached the positions of others with the right language. I thank Ambassador Masciullo and all the Sherpas for the work they have done. Something has changed at the G20, which is that without cooperation we do not move forward, and the best cooperation we know is multilateralism, with rules written long ago and which have guaranteed us prosperity. The rules to be changed must be changed together. And he gives an example. For the first time in a G20 document, in paragraph 30 we find a sentence that speaks of mechanisms for setting coal prices. We call on the various components of the G20 to act in accordance with their mandates to achieve these goals and an appropriate mix for economies with low greenhouse gas emissions by setting a target for the poorest countries. The link that gave rise to the change is the awareness that any progress compared to the past, together with the promise of help from the richer countries, makes sense. It is one of the cases in which both China and Russia have decided to change their position. Draghi, who strongly wanted this summit, also recalls the commitment made to the poorest countries in the world. We have laid the foundations for a more equitable recovery and found new ways to support countries in the world, concluded PM Draghi. Additional remarks. Biden, we will arrive at tangible results, thanks to Italy. The summit of G20 leaders in Rome produced tangible results on the climate, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the economy. U.S. President Joe Biden said this in the final press conference, before leaving for Glasgow, for COP26, and expressly thanked Italy and Prime Minister Mario Draghi for the great work done. I believe we have made tangible progress, also thanks to the determination that the United States has brought to the table of the discussions. The summit showed America's power when it engages and works with our partner allies on the issues. Biden then remarked that nothing can replace face-to-face negotiations for global cooperation. 1 trillion trees planted by 2030. Recognizing the urgency to combat soil degradation and create new carbon sinks, we share the ambitious goal of collectively planting 1 trillion trees, focusing on the most degraded ecosystems on the planet. This can be read in the final declaration of the G20 summit in Rome. We urge other countries to join forces with the G20 to achieve this global goal by 2030, including through climate projects, with the involvement of the private sector and civil society, reads again. Johnson, if Glasgow fails, everything fails. I'll be clear, if Glasgow fails, everything fails. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said this with reference to COP26, at a press conference at the end of the G20 in Rome. We have made progress in this G20 but we still have a way to go, he added. We knew haven't talked for some time. Draghi Erdogan thaw in the first handshake at the G20. A comment from the Huffington Post. From the G20 in Rome, we expected more responses and concrete actions on the front of the fight against the climate crisis. We are disappointed with the climate pact signed today. This is an agreement that formalizes what has already been acquired in the past, without providing for concrete commitments on climate finance, starting with Italy, which has not put on the table its fair contribution, at least €3 billion a year for a total of $100 billion promised 6 years ago in Paris as a collective commitment of industrialized countries to help the poorest in climate action. In short, at the Nuvola Rome, the G20 essentially discovered hot water in the fight against the climate crisis. Now the hope is that in Glasgow, where COP26 opens today, the greats of the planet will be able to find an agreement to reach an ambitious new climate agreement capable of keeping the 1.5 degrees Celsius target alive of the Paris Agreement signed in 2015, but also to accelerate adaptation to climate change, cope with the losses and damage of the communities most affected by the emergency, but also and above all adequately finance the action of poor countries and complete the rulebook, i.e. the implementing rules of the agreement, to finally make it operational. Agreement on trade in Afghanistan. Distances on Libya. Turkey brought a biography as a gift to sign the peace.
Thank you for listening to our news update. There's more on youtube.com/travel news group, or you can read us, of course, in going to our news portal at eTurboNews.com or travelnews.online.